Good morning, YouTube. So, this morning, I'm happy to introduce Samantha, a interdimensional mushroom gatherer. So, another early piece that I did, and here she is. So, this piece is 18 inches tall by 10 inches wide and about 12 inches deep. It's sitting on a 12 by 12 marble tile, pretty much solid pewter. There's a small concave in the base that I ground out with a special attachment to recycle some of the pewter and make it a little less heavy. This piece probably weighs about 50 pounds. There are, in case there are any casters out there wondering about her legs, 85 to 90% of the mass of those legs are stainless steel. So I put long dowels in the hollow mold and form them in a way that they get locked deep inside of her torso and then down into the base itself. So those legs are very rigid, and rightly so, because they're holding up probably a good 20 pounds. And there's a longer description of this piece on my art-only channel, and you'll see a link for that, or at least information on how to navigate over there. But I'm pretty sure that it shows up as a link in the description. So feel free to travel over there and visit the studio page. Not a long narrative, simply a portrait of Samantha walking through a swampy portion of a world that she's manifested in, and she's gathering mushrooms per her usual. Some general ones that are in her basket on your left and to her right, and some specific ones that are tethered to her waist on her left and your right. That seashell fan up above, that's cast from a real seashell. And again, everything from the bottom of the legs up is completely solid. Because of the detail of these pieces, it's really not worth hollowing out certain objects, particularly the head. So this piece, as far as I recall, I'm going to pause a little bit just to check my internal hard drive. As far as I can recall, this piece was cast in one pour. There are no side molds. Maybe the mushrooms on her left, but I don't think so. I think that those are, if I see it better when it comes back around, I'm pretty sure those are integrated into her, as far as there not being spaces due to it being a separate object being added on. And the basket is a question mark. I've cast a lot of pieces, and this was quite some time ago that I cast this piece, probably about 3 or 4 years. The basket might be separate, and then again, it might not be. But ultimately, 99%, about 99% of this piece is all in one go. So I cast the molten pewter around the stainless steel rods, and those the collection of spherical objects along her legs are meant to depict like a molecular aesthetic. So she is not the everyday tourist in this area. So she wears her interdimensionalness as part of her natural aesthetic. Her body is both. It displays both solids and the quantum side of things. So this is Samantha. And that's a pickle on the top of her humble headdress. I would advise, if you want to see it in greater detail, and maybe it's not being displayed as such on the default YouTube view, to change your settings to high definition and possibly make the viewing screen larger versus the default viewer that YouTube offers. So I'm going to switch back over, and per my usual, hop up and turn off the turntable that is sweating bullets, holding this 50-pound plus piece up and rotating it. So here we go. Thank you for spending some time with myself and Samantha. So away I go, and I'll be right back. So this morning, I'm going to briefly touch on some things, and let me see here. Yes, I'm clear. So my routine is ultimately, I go to work in the morning, and think about things during the day that I've reviewed online around topics that interest me and concern me, and that I'm compelled to share my observations and feelings towards. And then I come home and I get updated via various independent journalists and news collaborations on YouTube. And I hope that YouTube evolves into a more um, open-minded platform. I know that there's shadow banning occurring on YouTube, compliments of APAC, I'm sure. And YouTube can, they play a balancing act, which is, in my mind, more around capitalism and giving an air of moderation to its supporters outside of, say, being concerned with dignity or character of their actions. It's more of a pragmatic approach of staying in the center. And yet it's kind of neither here nor there, because people are still getting their messages out, whether their channel is somewhat limited to monetization. YouTube is still allowing independent journalists and scholars to say what they will and point to the facts. And that's a good thing, irregardless of refinements that I hope evolve further down the line, that could be seen as taking a stand and supporting the truth and the facts versus a kind of beating around the bush, as my old school grandmother would say. So here's what I'm going to share this morning. It's going to be relatively brief. You have people talking around the issue of Israel, particularly people who are interviewing Israelis that are close to Netanyahu or the IDF or the inner workings of the Zionist regime. And there are words and phrases and holding them accountable that they're shying away from. They'll speak in general terms like, people are worried that Israel is doing things that are not compliant with our model of democracy. Well, that's a very vague. You could barely call it an accusation. It's more of an implied pointer to the letter A, and whether it belongs to the word accusation is another question. Very vague and gutless, and I feel like this sort of the word blasé comes to mind, but I don't know why. It may not be the best. Bland is better. The way mainstream media presents Israel and all that's happening there, never mind the U.S. State Department and the CIA and MI6 that support and collaborate with Mossad. the way they present it is more around corporate interests and business models and their imagination of how the future is going to go. So there's a lot of ulterior motives that have nothing to do with journalism whatsoever. Not unlike the U.S. Supreme Court being infiltrated by AIPAC and major corporations to influence their rulings. So this is what I'm going to propose as far as how much this channel can help. Don't mimic organizations. Stay an individual. It's very easy to become a follower, a student of ignorance, and that's meant to be an ironic phrase. I mean, it's very easy to think that, well, since such a huge group of people believe a certain thing, then it must be true. And it's a form of fast food for the intellect to assume rather than verify. So verify everything, cross-examine, fact-check. If you listen to something on YouTube or online or on your TV, the news that is, either record it and go back and watch it again and make notes and just see what happens when you fact check it. And then when you realize that 90% of what they've told you is half of the story, if not contradictory to the actual story, then you can think back and forwards that if that's the case with just one exercise that you've done, what does that imply about what you know that they've said in the past and what they're going to say in the future? And do yourself that favor. Don't mimic the propaganda. So Israel is scrambling. They have very little left in saving face, which in my mind they can't, because their own actions has massed into something much larger than any amount of propaganda can dismantle. The ethnic cleansing in Gaza has continued pretty much nonstop since October 8th of 2023. Spilled over into Lebanon recently. It's a dark irony that a faith purporting to dwell in the life spring of earth feeds ultimately by death. And that's a very peculiar contradiction. So I feel like if Israel attacks preemptively Iran, because I feel like ultimately Israel's in charge of America, of the American president. And even if Trump goes cold on the idea of helping Israel invade or try to invade Iran, Israel will attack anyway, because that's their last card. They're scrambling for a win when they've lost a long time ago. They lost. They lost when they agreed on the Balfour Papers, or some call it the Balfour Declaration. They lost way before 1948. So if Israel attacks Iran, this will plunge the United States into a very long night of reckoning. And the civil unrest and the general populace, deep contemplation will be spawned and evolve into very peculiar movements and actions at home, domestically. And that's how I'm feeling it. The signs for it are already occurring, where you have domestic interviewers, people who are just private citizens interviewing pro-Israel civilians. And when one of those pro-Israel civilians spouts some sort of blanket propaganda, you have private citizens giving back a kind of well-researched reverse psychology reply. Ultimately, they are giving examples of like a what would you do if, and giving stories around what Israel has been doing to Palestinians since 48, actually before 48, because there were massacres and invasions before 48. And once these hypotheticals are given out, like saying to an American, well, what if you were treated like these Palestinians were treated? What would you do? And so they reverse the role in a sense, like you walk a mile in the Palestinian shoes kind of scenario. And then ultimately there's crickets in the end of this interview, where suddenly a person's conscience or their reasoning faculty gets triggered because their own imagination has been prompted and framed in a way to go about this exercise of being an American, imagining this event mimicking what a Palestinian has gone through. What would you do? And this is going on a lot. And that will evolve into big changes. So, in short, I still feel a lot of grief around just being an American and understanding that um, all this is just under the surface of understanding and knowing about as a private citizen, and how just knowing about it has changed my life forever, or at least as long as forever is in biological life. Um, and that the avoidance of politics, not that it's meant to be selfish. I think that there's something in the adult, in air quotes, the adult, that intuitively understands that if they pay attention to politics, they'll have to grow up and make a big shift. But then again, I guess it depends on what their idea of politics is, because if they think that politics is simply a bunch of grown adults bickering and arguing and lying and sabotaging one another's lives in order to achieve some sort of king of the mountain status for a few days until the mountain is bulldozed and someone else makes a new one, then yes, that's superficial and not to really be engaged with, and kind of a waste of time, so to speak. Not that I believe in wasting time, but ultimately there are things that I'll find on YouTube that I just scroll past because I understand that it is what it is and I don't need to be reminded of it, because it's redundant. So ultimately, to me, politics is understanding the reputation, the actual historical reputation of one's government and its actions and its deeds and the unmet consequences of those actions and deeds, and whether they contain any dignity or practical application towards their stated goal as government. And America is full up of hypocrisy and double standards. So it's kind of a rough time right now to be, quote, an American, if you're actually paying attention. It's a better time to just simply be a better human, if not that that's a simple thing to be. But as far as wearing many masks or being many versions of oneself, I think right now the anchor point is to make sure that your own character is not mimicking the propaganda and what the corporations are tethered to, not to become the echo of words that never left your own speech. So I think that's pretty much it. Thank you for supporting the channel, and feel free to like and subscribe, share the channel, leave a comment, ask a question, and I wish you a good rest of the week ahead. Take care.